we don't like to think of families as transactional entities. We love each other, we care for each other. It's like, oh, well, we just have a shared bank account. If you can't tell where the money in that bank account is, who it's coming from, who is benefiting from it, that's worrisome.
Hey y'all, this is Kosta, and today I'm here with my guest, April Harris Jackson, attorney and founder of Graceful Aging Legal Services, a firm focused on helping clients navigate the complicated processes of estate planning, probate, conservatorships, and Medicaid planning. Today we're talking about how to identify and report elder abuse. So April, what is elder abuse, and what are the different types of abuses that can occur?
Yeah, Kosta, so thanks so much for having me on. So this is one of the topics that I think most people are aware of, even if they don't think they are. We see it a lot in the media right now with scammers, and older adults are one of the primary targets of a lot of those scams. So when we think about elder abuse, it's what it sounds like. And it can take any number of shapes, but really it is kind of, the definition is when it's somebody over 65 who is being, when they're being physically, financially abused or neglected, when they're not getting the resources that they need. And that also includes self-neglect, which a lot of people don't think about. And kind of within the statutory, the legal framework, this also includes other vulnerable adults. So not just everyone 65 and older. So if you know of another person who may be particularly vulnerable due to medical condition or whatever the situation may be, that also kind of falls in this category under the law.
In your opinion, like how often are you litigating or being made aware of cases like this where whether it's financial exploitation or physical abuse, how often is that happening to people?
So my practice has a couple different elements. So we do transactional work, which is estate planning.
Sure.
And then we do litigation, which is probate or conservatorships.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say, and I'm also appointed by the court sometimes to handle conservatorships where they need an attorney to step in and investigate or represent a party that is believed to have some type of condition where they need the court to step in.
Sure.
I would say of those conservatorship litigation cases,
mm-hmm.
Certainly it happens sometimes in wills. Certainly it sometimes happens when we're looking at estate planning and a family comes to us and says, hey, I think this is happening. But conservatorships are really where we're seeing it the most. And I would say probably 50 to 60% of the cases, there is some type of something has happened to make the family, nobody wants a conservatorship.
Of course. Right.
It is mainly when they're like, okay, we don't know what to do anymore. We can't keep mom from buying gift cards and sending them to scammers. Or, we can't keep mom from sending all of her money to her fake Facebook boyfriend. Things like that.
Yeah. And being in the industry, I have had to facilitate something called a rep payee. Not quite conservatorship, but somebody to manage people's finances because those things happen and they happen often. Yeah. And a lot of times, people that are elderly, or I think it's fair to say just disabled, they don't necessarily have to be elderly. They feel they have a sense of isolation, and so they're more vulnerable to this level of exploitation because they want to have a connection with somebody And it's hard for them, if they're physically disabled, to just, move around like you and I do and just, go down the road to the local restaurant and get a drink and some food and talk to somebody. So I completely resonate with that. I got to ask, though, like, what are the most recognizable and early signs of the different factors of elder abuse?
Yeah. So I think when you're seeing elder abuse, the primary ones that we see are, financial is a huge one, because it also impacts your ability to get other resources that you need.
Right.
So if mom is sending all of her money to her internet boyfriend, she may be sending the money that she needs for her groceries or her medication or to put gas in her car.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's, financial is big and it affects all the other areas. Whereas there's also physical abuse that can take place or neglect. So the signs of physical abuse can kind of be different depending on the person's situation. And of course, all of these are very situational.
Sure.
Depending on the person and what their particular abilities or limitations might be. And so, for example, we may see someone saying, "Oh, I don't have any groceries at home," or "I don't have much food in the house."
Mm-hmm.
Or "I didn't take my medication today."
Mm-hmm.
And it's not necessarily that, and sometimes that might just be like they didn't take their medication or they haven't gone grocery shopping. And sometimes that could be their caregiver took their medication and
mm-hmm.
sold it
mm-hmm.
on the drug market. I don't know.
How often does that type of stuff happen? Do you face those types of outcomes like often in court where you've got, somebody that you're being assigned a conservator for and the primary reason is not necessarily self-neglect, but it's because some form of neglect on the part of an agency or a private pay caregiver, somebody that was financially exploiting the individual. And the reason that I ask that is I read a statistic a few months back that 60% of elderly individuals are financially exploited, and the majority of the time it's by other family members.
Yes. And that is my experience as well.
Okay.
I think while I have seen things from, I can recall one particular situation from an agency, where I don't know that it was the agency. I think it was that particular caregiver.
Mm-hmm.
It is almost always the family.
I see.
Unfortunately.
Yeah.
And, it is somebody who, and sometimes I don't know that it's necessarily somebody who thinks of it as abuse. They may just think, well, we don't have a lot of resources.
Right. They justify
it by
they're providing care. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And there are ways to provide care and,
do it legally.
Make that exactly. And make that distinction between what is compensation for care and my resources as a person providing the care and the resources of the person who is being cared for.
Yeah.
And making that transaction.
Right.
And I think that's also part of it is we don't like to think of families as transactional entities. We love each other. We care for each other. It's like, oh, well, we just have a shared bank account. If you can't tell where the money in that bank account is, who it's coming from, who is benefiting from it, that's worrisome.
Yeah. And we've created
the court.
Well, we've created this like crazy system. It's I don't even know. It's like there's so much to unpack literally in this conversation, but you've got family members who essentially need to go into contract with their own family if they are going to be utilizing their loved one's funds for anything but their own needs. Right? I think that's safe to say. At the same time, if the exploitation doesn't happen from a family member, it could happen from a primary caregiver who isn't that much better off than a family member who needs money for other resources. And so it's like you don't really have any safe place to turn. And so I got to ask, like, from your opinion, who do you think is at the greatest risk of these types of abuses?
And I think you've already identified it. It's people who are isolated, people who are lonely, people who don't have a strong support system. Where, if something happens, they feel like they can say, well, I need something. Or where a caregiver, I don't know that many caregivers start out saying, I'm going to take money from my loved one.
Sure. Yeah. It's a good point.
But I also think that we don't provide a lot of resources for respite. And I can, without justifying it, I can also see how someone says, well, I've basically given up my life to care for my loved one.
And so I might be entitled. Yeah. Yeah. Makes sense.
And they're not wrong necessarily. It's a matter of how do you get that?
Sure.
Compensation.
So as we're discussing this kind of contractual engagement, right? So let's say we take that component out of it and we talk about just the steps that we can take to prevent elder abuse from occurring in the first place. What do you think those steps are?
Yeah. So I think, and are you asking, like, I'm assuming you're asking on an individual level.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that there's this component to financial exploitation where, like, you have to, if you're going to be using your money that's not yours, you need to have some type of justification, paper trail, whatever it might be. But, like, what if we don't talk about necessarily financial exploitation? What about, like, the physical aspects of people that are just providing care that are neglectful or even things like self-neglect?
Yeah. So I think that the first thing to do is acknowledge that caregiving is such a hard job. If someone is, especially for somebody who is a full-time caregiver, whether that's for, through an agency or through a family member or for a family member or loved one, unless you are in that situation day in and day out, you don't know what they're dealing with that person that they are providing care for. And it may be that they are trying their best to get the person to take a shower or bath. But what you see when you visit is the hygiene is needing some attention.
Sure. Or the condition of the home, maybe.
Or the condition of the home. And so I think it's, you have to, be involved, listen, offer to help. And it may just be something small like, hey, can I come over and do the laundry this weekend?
Yeah, it's a good point.
Like, how much would they feel like that was taken off their plate just to have one less thing to do? Or, I'm going to come over and hang out with, cousin Sue, and why don't you go see a movie or grab lunch with a friend? And I know that sometimes it's hard to put yourself in that position when it's not you. But just because when you're there with that person, you may see things that the caregiver deals with all the time, but you don't see.
Can I ask you about, you know how like sometimes when you're watching TV, you see those ads for nursing home, like they're attorneys essentially that are like, if
Like
your loved
malpractice.
one has been neglected or abused at a nursing facility, please call this number, right? Does that actually happen? Like, do people actually call that number and sue nursing homes? And the reason that I asked that question
They do.
is because nursing homes haven't improved, even if they have been sued for quality of care concerns and potential neglect, abuse, whatever it might be. But the environment within a nursing facility is still very much poor relative to standards of what you would expect as a loved one in your own home. So are these cases creating change within the long-term care space? Does that make sense?
It does.
Okay.
And so, and I'm sure you have seen this. For one thing, right now is an interesting time because of the pandemic and because of the worker shortage.
Right.
That's a whole other thing because we don't pay caregivers enough. But I think what happens is that when the nursing homes, let's say nursing home X, is investigated, they get so many fines. They get, like they've got the state breathing down their neck. Well, they just unincorporate, change names, and reopen, or sell it to another company.
Right.
And I don't know that much changes.
Right.
Unfortunately.
Right. Do people get money in these? Do people get money in these settlements?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So at least there's some type of compensation for bad behavior.
Yeah. Yes, there is compensation for the individuals who follow through.
But the liability of the decision makers overseeing this nursing home, I guess, essentially is elusive because they're not the ones being charged. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm not going to put words in your mouth, but I just want to hear your opinion on this. You said it very well, and I know when you were talking about how primary caregivers have a very hard job, and sometimes what you would expect to be negligent or, bad behavior is them trying to do the best that they can. Is that the same type of argument that occurs within a nursing facility when you're talking about, caregivers who or CNAs in a facility,
right,
who's like 1 for 10 patients, and then they have a justification because that's what the state requires, is that you have a 1 to 10 care ratio. I mean, it's hard to make a case around that, right? It's hard to say like, well, it's the fault of the administrators within the facility, right?
Well, and I think, just because the state says you have a minimum number, that doesn't mean you can't have more.
Right.
If your patients aren't being treated, because it's very different to have a patient in a facility who is, mobile. And so a caregiver who has 5 patients who can, are able to walk around, hang out by themselves. They go to the dining room together, whatever. That person is, going to have a lot different experience and requirements of her time and energy, or their time and energy, than somebody who has 5 patients who need assistance to transfer, assistance with hygiene.
Right.
And so just saying you have to have X number per resident doesn't account for each resident's needs.
Because they have a different level of care.
So, I'm certainly I do think that the care providers are doing the best that they can with what they're given.
Mm-hmm.
I think sometimes they're not given the resources they need to provide the care that is needed.
Can I ask if someone suspects, sorry, let me do that one more time. Can I ask if someone suspects that an aging individual is a victim of elder abuse? I mean, what do you think they should do?
So I think it depends on this. It always depends. I'm a lawyer. That's our answer. It depends.
Sure.
So, you never want to make unfounded allegations. So if it's kind of like, oh, well, why doesn't grandma have any food at her house? Try to find out before you go make a report.
Right.
Is it because grandma needs a ride to the store every week? Is it because, or is it because grandma doesn't have any money? And if grandma doesn't have any money, but she should,
right,
then we want to look into that.
Yes. That's right.
Maybe she just needs you to take her to the store every week, or arrange transportation some other way. But if you find out that she's, been, that there has been a perpetrator involved, or you suspect that is the case, you don't think it's just something that, grandma, that you as a loved one could assist her with resolving, on your own, then you're going to want to make an APS report. If grandma is in a skilled nursing facility, you're going to want to report that to the long-term care ombudsman.
Okay.
You can make both of those reports online. They're anonymous.
Okay. Nice. And so APS is essentially an acronym for Adult Protective Services. Yes. And we're both in Tennessee, so we can speak intelligently about this system because I know we both have a lot of experience with it. Adult Protective Services has a website. Do you know what the website is off the top of your head by any chance?
I don't.
Okay. We'll put it in the links at the bottom.
At
the show links.
I'm like,
so you
Google.
Can make the report online or you can call their hotline, Adult Protective Services hotline. And then with regards to the long-term care ombudsman, there is one in each region of the state that has at the development district. So like, for example, up the Upper Cumberland where we're at is UCDD. The Upper Cumberland Development District has an ombudsman. The development district in your area, I think, is the Southeast Human Resource Agency. Is that right?
I don't. Is it?
It's one of those.
Yeah, it goes through a couple. There are several levels. Levels. I'm like, everything's through TCAD.
Right.
Just go to TCAD website.
Yep, that's right.
Handle your business.
Yep. So you have this. So you make this report, and you can make it anonymously. What happens after your report is made? Do they send out like a squad and start doing the investigations, collecting evidence? Like what happens?
Yeah. So APS will send out people.
Okay.
To kind of look at, what's the condition of the home, what's happening. They certainly may involve the long-term care ombudsman if it's happening in a facility, and that's appropriate. So one of the limitations that APS has is that they are kind of restricted to it has to be something that's involving some type of government income.
Okay.
So there's that limitation. However, if they weed it out on that end, it still goes to a team that includes the district attorney's office.
Nice.
For wherever that person lives. Those are called VAPIT teams. And so then that team will review it and say, hey, APS maybe doesn't have the jurisdiction to look at this. Should we look into this further?
Mm-hmm.
And they will, maybe call people, call witnesses, investigate a little bit and see, what can and should, what should and can be done.
Right. And so this investigation happens, and there may be somebody that's implicated legally as a defendant, and they could be charged with abuse. Elder abuse is a crime. So is financial exploitation. They get put on a registry. But what type of legal options are available to protect an aging individual who's being abused?
Yeah, so, unfortunately, there are really only, in my mind, and, if you've made the report and nothing has come of that,
mm-hmm.
or if you kind of want to be protective prior to any outcome of the report.
Sure.
If you suspect abuse and you can't resolve it, you got to make the report. Tennesseans are mandatory reporters.
Okay.
Even if you didn't know that. So, the website lets you make a report online. It's anonymous. So don't worry about that piece. Mm-hmm. If you need the ability to protect your loved one more, you don't think that whatever has happened so far is going to go far enough. So if your loved one, and sometimes this depends on the medical condition of your loved one. So if your loved one has a power of attorney,
okay,
and they are no longer capable of making decisions for themselves, mm-hmm. then likely they're not able to revoke that power of attorney either. But that's something you're going to have a conversation with their doctor about, because if they have the ability to make decisions for themselves, they can say, I don't want you to be my power of attorney anymore. I want to keep giving my internet boyfriend money.
Yes.
So, you'll want to have that conversation with their doctor. And this is where kind of, being involved, getting to know the players in their lives, and knowing who's in that support system, and being in that support system and creating a strong support system. It's very helpful. Mm-hmm. So that the doctor will actually talk to you when you call. Right. Or you can go to the appointment with them, and then the doctor, can, to what extent they can give you information while you're there with them. So possibly a power of attorney.
Okay.
If there's no power of attorney, or maybe the person tries to revoke the power of attorney, or sometimes we have multiple agents under a power of attorney who can't decide what the right thing is, you can petition the court to appoint a conservator.
Okay.
And lots of people are familiar with conservatorships right now because of Britney Spears.
Mm-hmm.
But that is basically asking the court to effectively take away the rights of your loved one and letting you substitute your judgment if you are asking to be the conservator. So substitute, basically the rights that they had were transferred to the conservator in order to pay their bills, make healthcare decisions, all of those kind of day-to-day things. Going back to your question about negligence and nursing home malpractice,
mm-hmm.
This is one situation where we see conservatorships petitioned for, is because family members see that something has not been right and they want to sue the facility, but their loved one either doesn't have the capacity to sue, or maybe isn't willing to sue, probably because they don't have the capacity.
Right.
And so they'll file for a conservatorship so that the conservator can actually
sue on their behalf.
Mm-hmm.
Do you ever run into like situations being a conservator where you're dealing with a family member who, engaged in whatever kind of nefarious behavior. And then the court or APS, for example, asks you to step in and take this case on, to become the conservator for this individual. Does the family kind of fade into the background, or do they continue to hang around and see if they can kind of, get you in your aha moment, and the only reason that I ask that is because I'm trying to explain to people the complexity of this system, and this isn't like selling a product or providing a service. Like, these are human beings, and human beings are complicated, and their lives are complicated. And I feel like we've got to figure out a better solution to the system, because it's everything's so subjective.
Right. And the law is complicated.
Right.
I think I was having this conversation yesterday with another attorney. But things like inventory, property management plans, accountings, those are things that, I do those all day.
Mm-hmm.
But if you tell, somebody, just a family member, hey, you're going to have to do an accounting. What do you mean? What is an accounting? What do I what's involved? Can I do that myself? I don't want to pay a lawyer,
right?
Which I understand. It's just this whole system that is justifiably complex because they don't want, unfortunately, again, the media has portrayed, and there have been situations where conservators have taken advantage of people.
Mm-hmm.
And the courts want to prevent that. And so when that happens, they will appoint a successor conservator. And that the conservator, whether or not it is somebody who is, maybe you're going after a previous conservator. And I want to emphasize that is rare.
Right.
Tennessee has a lot of safeguards against that. But if that, if somebody has financially abused your loved one and then you are appointed as their conservator, you can then go back and sue whoever you think did the wrong thing to them. A recoupment is what it's called in the legal terminology.
So
go ahead.
So we always like to end the show with a call to action. What's your best advice for someone entering the long-term care industry as a patient, a caregiver, or an industry professional?
So I would say for all of those categories, my piece of advice would be to listen.
Okay.
Because if you truly listen, you're going to pick up on some things. If you're a patient, you're going to kind of learn a little bit more about how the system works. Mm-hmm. If you're going to be a caregiver, you're going to learn how much support you need and kind of figure out who you can maybe ask for that support. And certainly for industry professionals like us, you want to know where are those resources to be able to provide to your clients and really the community as a whole. So I would say listen and then share what you know.